Hi, I'm Sarah Fry. Welcome to PaTTAnpod. Everyone loves a good mashup, right? Take two things that are awesome on their own, add them together, and you get something even better. Here's an example. Evidence-based practices for culturally and linguistically appropriate instruction, plus multi-tiered systems of support. Today on PaTTAnpod, we'll learn about supporting English learners with disabilities using the PLUSS framework with our guest, Dr. Julie Esparza Brown. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for traveling all this way. So, Julie, I already mentioned this kind of idea of a mashup, but before we dive in too deep, could you tell us a little bit about the complexities of distinguishing between what is a cultural and linguistic difference and a disability?
Sure. So much of it is about context and background knowledge of students and understanding what they bring with them to school and what our expectations are in particularly English-only environments, or even if they're in a dual language class, understanding the roots of struggles that they have, and that many of those struggles may be based on language that they don't understand. So then how are they going to show you what they know, right?
So wow, that was, I know you've had practice, but you got right to the point. So now let's dig into this idea of PLUSS, right? This idea of this magical mashup. How does the PLUSS framework embed those principles of culturally and linguistically appropriate instruction within the world of MTSS?
Great, that's a really good question. Now, within MTSS, it is about tiered supports of increasingly intense supports from Tier 1, which is supposed to meet the needs of 80% of students within a group. Tier 2, that 15% of the students might need additional support, sometimes we call it a double dose, or Tier 3, that most intensive level of support. Now, for language learners, we provide ESL or ELD services through Title III in order for them to develop English language proficiency. And then we forget sometimes that they can't learn language in half an hour a day, 4 or 5 days a week, right? And so that intentionality around language instruction has to happen across and throughout all of the tiers and throughout every content area. Right? You can't just be a science teacher. Language is a part of that. Or a music teacher. Language is going to be a part of that. So what PLUSS does, it's a flexible framework that is an overlay to evidence-based practices in core curriculum and content area that can be used across every tier. And also through even in dual language programs, because you're always going to really be needing to ensure that students truly understand the language that we're using and the language that we're expecting them to use. Also, our average curriculum is really based around mainstream knowledge of kind of middle America, right? And we can't assume that all of our learners, particularly those that are recent arrivals, or even those that have lived here for a while, have the same background knowledge and experiences. Those life experiences really matter, and we have to both build on those assets that students bring, or also help them build new background knowledge in order to understand content. And it's like something I was sharing with the audience earlier today, that background knowledge is like a magnet. The more you know, it's going to stick better.
I love that.
And so PLUSS is exactly what the word stands for. It's in addition to. So our PLUSS framework, that stands for Pre-Teach Critical Vocabulary and Prime Background Knowledge, Make Cultural Connections, L, Language Use and Modeling, U, Use Visuals and Graphic Organizers. The first S, or S1, as it's called in Pennsylvania, Systematic and Explicit Instruction, and a second S, Strategic Use of Native Language in Teaching for Transfer. All of those components are evidence-based strategies and key concepts of effective practices, instructional practices for language learners. And again, PLUSS is an overlay to existing programs. It's not an intervention on its own, but can be used in core and in interventions.
All right.
Sorry.
No, that's
Too
great.
much information.
No, it's wonderful. So I just kind of want to just reiterate what you're saying, or what I'm hearing you say is that when we think of PLUSS in both the acronym for this framework, but also just the definition of the word, yes, we're adding on, but that doesn't mean that we are adding on work to teachers or we're adding on expectations to our students and making life more difficult for everybody. What you hit on already is that we're applying evidence-based practices, what we know works, across the board. We want it to be integrated. We want it to be contextualized. It cannot just happen and pull out time in 15 minutes between classes or something like that.
No.
So here's the what everybody always wants to hear. What does that look like? Could you give us a few prime examples of how the PLUSS framework works in action?
Yes. So a prime example might be, let me think about an intervention group, for example. So there's maybe an intervention program that has some really interesting stories about geography and history, and each story really has some great content, right? But for students that have no experience with that content, the story might be really boring because they don't have enough knowledge about it for the story to catch them, for it to be interesting. And we're trying to teach skills through unknown information, right? So instead, what if we prime that background knowledge by showing a quick video of the content? And we find so often just a quick video that we find on our phone or on their computer is really a hook for that student to be engaged and to understand, well, this is a really interesting lesson. And now as they learn some skills, literacy skills through the lesson, but they're engaged because they have more information to build that upon, then we have a meaningful lesson. And then sometimes we want to help students make connections from the content to what their backgrounds are. So what were your experiences in a situation similar to this? So really, it's about just making connections and making sure that students understand that reading is about learning. Reading is about opening the world. It is not about just decoding.
Oh, as a former librarian, you just warmed my heart so much, right? And I want to also just do a callback earlier, the idea of that assets-based, right? So acknowledging that while some of these students may not have had the same experiences or relatable experiences, that is not a deficit. That is just a difference.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's beautifully said. Absolutely, because students are all going to bring assets. And it's like I remind my pre-service teachers all the time that every child brings a gift, right? So what is that gift and the asset? And for us to spend the time digging down, so it's hard to teach something or somebody we don't know. So we have to dig down and really learn to know our students and their families and their communities to kind of really to unearth those assets and build on those. So it may be different, but they're assets. They bring experiences.
So I know that we have some resources. You have been supporting Pennsylvania educators with getting started. For administrators and educators that are listening or watching this podcast, where would you point them? What are some quick starts? How could they get started with PLUSS? Well,
so we were able to investigate PLUSS, which is a framework we created a little more than a dozen years ago. But in 2015, we were fortunate to receive a grant through the Office of Special Education Programs that's called a Model Demonstration Grant. And we were to continue to develop PLUSS and a culturally and linguistically responsive MTSS framework. So all of that knowledge and information that we developed during the 4 years of the grant that has been vetted by the federal government Department of Special Ed is on our website, projectle.org, or Project LE. But LE stands for Lectura en Excelencia y Éxito. And so the resources are there, many links, practical videos that students or the audience can look at, and we have a PLUSS rubric where they can look at the videos and identify the PLUSS features that they find in the videos, and then we have some guidelines for that. So they can really get a lot of, do some kind of individual work just looking at that website. We also have the latest issue of the Journal from the International Dyslexia Association has a new article that was released last week on PLUSS, and we see that as really a user-friendly description of PLUSS with lots of visuals and examples. So there's many ways, and feel free to contact me as well, and you'll find my information on the Project Lee website.
Well, thank you so much. And I know you've been here at PaTTAN leading some educators in some professional development so they can go right back into their classrooms, especially around that teacher reflection tool.
Yep.
And our EL initiative here at PaTTAN have been kind of minding that relationship of all of the work that you've put into it and shaping it to meet our needs. So shout out to you and them for that. Julie's mentioned some of those resources already, but if you check out our show notes, you'll see the Project Lee or Project Lee, L-E-E website. We'll be sure to link the MTSS resources and the EL resources as well from PaTTAN in the show notes, so check those out. And as I've already done, I'll give our EL initiative a big shout out for hosting Julie here at PaTTAN for some professional development. You'll notice the PaTTAN website, big button to see our professional development calendar. You can actually filter down by topic and see when we might be inviting her back or there might be relevant trainings available. Thank you, John Ragsdale, for producing this episode, and more than anything, thank you to our audience for coming to spend time with us. We hope you come back to PaTTAnpod really soon.
And thank you for having me.